All right, we'll call the meeting to order and of the tax revision subcommittee. Chairman Stevens, you want to tell us about HB 469?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. House Bill 469 quickly hopes to accomplish the following 10 things. It's going to raise the annual program cap. Of course, this is the for the large rehab projects. It'll raise the per project cap by 50% from 5 million to 10 million. It removes the ownership requirement, which was a stumbling block that we had before, so that you can have a project under contract, if you will, and still be able to go and apply for this credit. It raises the floor from 300,000 to 500,000, relaxes the project completion date requirements. That was an issue we ran into in Savannah, on that mega project we had down there. It provides a rollover for the unused credit, as we do in other credits. Provides a 10-year carry forward and removes the limit on transferability. Resets the sunset clock up to 10 years, as Chairman Houston pointed out a minute ago, and it provides for confidentiality. What they're asking for, once we left the subcommittee, if you will, is on line 53.
Can you just real quick, will you read your LC number?
Oh, I'm sorry. Apologize. Is it, there we go. It's LC 44 1696S.
Hang on just a second.
You do?
Okay, refresh it.
1687 is the latest revision. I believe this must be a copy that came in before. Houston, we have a problem.
I'm trying, but it's
this is the one that I handled this morning.
So
1687S, is that it? It's should be 1696
version. When you're
clearly
when you refresh it, we'll get you a pad that refreshes it. Good.
It did? Okay. Got it.
All right, now read your LC number again, if you don't mind, and make sure everybody's looking online and other places, and then tell us what line. Thanks.
LC 44 1696S. Once it finally refreshes to get there.
Department of Revenue asked that we eliminate the rollover provision and eliminate the confidentiality provision.
Thank you.
And in this version, they have been eliminated. So those are two of the things Department of Revenue asked for that they got.
Got it.
Eliminate the rollover and confidentiality.
Department of Revenue, I was just pointed out to me, had asked for two things, that they eliminate the rollover provision and the confidentiality provision, which we're taking care of in this particular piece here. On line 74, if you will, on this bill, it after the word available to insert is returned or, and of course, these are all revisions that came from DOR and DCA.
I'm sorry, tell me what line in the version we're looking at?
Should be on line 74.
What word?
The word available and to insert is returned or. Is that correct? We pull them from the wrong.
Yeah. Intention to amend this version we're looking at?
It should be, and we have an issue. We are. I think these revisions were made
on the earlier 87.
Version. Yeah.
Yes.
They have been. Those revisions you're speaking to have already been made.
Okay. This is what happens.
96 is ready to pass.
Mr. Chairman, 1696 is the one that these revisions were made on.
So they've already been made on this, and
correct. They've already been in there, so that you won't see these revisions. But what they did, again, on line 73, which would have said to replace 40 million with 50 million, and on line 123 would have said after the word makes to insert or uses.
Or what?
Is that correct on line 123?
Do we?
Of the old version.
Our line references are off because of
Sorry.
the new version that's
It does
corrected.
delete section 3 from the version that's on here versus this bill.
Would you like us to look back at 1687? It's on our iPads. If that would
Yes,
help you,
That would help a lot.
if that would help you, let's all go back and pull up the previous version that's listed 1687S. And
It'll
then,
help
then
us.
your line references should be correct. And those are,
And it will also tell you exactly what we're taking out, putting in the cleanup language that came here that I've got next to me.
all right. Just for clarity, I was going to let his line references tell us in our previous version what was being changed in that. And
So you can see
then,
it,
and then we'll go over to 1696.
which is cleaned up.
Do we have,
Mr. Chairman, if it's helpful, this has happened, a lot has happened in the last 15 hours on this, and I can speak to the newest version if you want and walk y'all through the exact changes DOR asked for.
Why don't you do that? Pull up.
why don't you come
sit
on
right
up
there.
and do that? Because, right, I know we all work together with DOR
That's
on
right.
this to make sure. So we're going to go back now to, you tell me which,
The newest version, which is LC 44-1696S.
all right, let's get that back up.
We had input from the Department of Revenue, and we've been working with Department of Community Affairs as well. And Chairman Stevens got the newest version this morning, so probably not fair for him to be asked to go through these newest changes. If you look at that 1696S version, if you go to line 52, which is on page 3. Yes, sir.
Here it is. This isn't fresh. Do I need to just refresh on it? It just takes a while. That's a version there. And look at your LC number. Make sure you're. All right, I got it.
Okay.
All right.
Absolutely. Line 52.
Right.
So this program, I don't know if there's another one in the state, in that the Department of Natural Resources, the Department of Community Affairs, and the Department of Revenue all play a role. So they all have to coordinate and cooperate. And writing legislation related to this program, we have to work with all 3 agencies. So we've been doing that, and we've got what we think is a good product here. If you look on line 52, this is the workforce housing definition. There was an interest in adding an added incentive to the historic rehab tax credit program if you included workforce housing. We talked about that in the last subcommittee meeting. So,
Can I interrupt you?
yes.
Sort of take section by section. You said, I'm sorry,
People online.
I'm 7.
You're
So, Misty, number 7, am I on?
yeah, I think so. You are.
I can
Okay.
sure hear you.
All right, so, Ms. Tees, my question is, you said there was interest and there's been discussion. Whose bill is this? I mean, who are the parties at the table that have been asking for this?
The development community, the historic preservation community, the developers out there in the state who want to reclaim properties. And then actually the chairman said that there was interest in looking at opportunities to improve workforce housing or low-income housing around the state. And he said, can that be tied to this program?
So,
And so we've worked with that community as well, the low-income tax housing, low-income housing organizations and et cetera, to work on these definitions. And these definitions are a result of cooperation between DOR and DCA and DNR, which is,
again, I'm not being argumentative. I'm just trying to get my brain around why we're moving into housing. You know, we more from trying to protect historic structures in Georgia, which has been pretty effective through the decades. And now we're getting into basically social policy here, where we're providing, going into housing policy. That's what I'm uncomfortable about.
yes, sir. I think what I would say in response to that is that this is a historic rehab tax credit program, a renewal of that because it's expiring.
Right.
That was
I'm
an
good with
add-on
that.
to that program, and it is a pretty small, relatively speaking, I'm speculating here, but in practical reality, I don't know how many historic rehab programs are going to include low-income housing, but this was a suggestion by your chairman to include an opportunity to enhance the incentives for low-income housing, potentially in what would be a rehab of a historic property.
Let me see if we can, we got a committee member question.
Well, it's not a question, but it's to what has happened in a couple of the communities I'm affiliated with, and a great example of how this has been used without any funds other than private funds is over in Macon around Mercer University. There are neighborhoods over there that were going into blight, and people didn't want to send their kids to a college where there were such blighted communities, but they were historic homes in historic neighborhoods. So historic Macon made the neighborhood a historic neighborhood, and then people came in and renovated those houses. Some of them are multiple housing, an old house is divided into apartments. Some of them are individuals, but they have really cleaned up that neighborhood where it's not blighted anymore, and it's a more attractive area, and it's increased tax opportunities for the city of Macon, and it's just, but it's saved historic structures.
Thank you.
Just if may I, just a quick question. So, and again, all of that is laudable, but there were no low-income housing tax credits through the historic our historic preservation code that drove that, correct?
They put together packages of all sorts to make it happen.
So, and I'm
I'm not for
fine
making something of all.
philosophically with continuing. I'm fine with aggregating neighborhoods and pushing the policy forward. My heartburn is tying, again, I have no other words for it other than social policy, that we're not talking about job creation. We're not, historically, this has been the intent of this program to preserve important buildings, dwellings and buildings for historical purposes. And
I apologize, Chairman. I left the room. This is what was at my request, and I'll be happy to
understand.
explain the thought process behind it, and then you and I can discuss it further offline if you'd like to.
No,
But
that's fine.
and if David has any questions, but
I would just say, Mr. Chairman, just for
well, let me finish, and then you can say what you need to say. I just wanted to, kind of the thought process here is that yes, the historical rehabilitation is certainly a good thing, but we have a number of these structures, and I think the most the one that makes the most sense is when I've heard it presented down in Pulaski County, where we've had two structures that were historical in nature, and they were also through the GIC program allowed to revitalize and rehabilitate those two structures, and then they were included as a housing component as well. And we certainly have areas where we need this housing. We have a separate program that deals with that, but this was a way to find a multiplier for our communities, and a way to plus up a little bit, because we're getting a lot of that stuff, that we're having to address locally in our various communities. And this is something that would be a double benefit, not just preserve a historical and rehabilitate it, but you'd also add the housing component as well. So I know, this is a piece that meant a lot to Chairman Newton, and that was my 2 cents, and one of the reasons that I thought we would put that in for some level of discussion. And I know y'all have heard enough from me today, so I'll just shut up. But Chairman Knight, if you have a question or two, I'll be happy to try to answer it.
Again, I apologize. I share the same concerns that Bruce had talked to, and again, I love the historical piece of it, and but that was what I agree. There's a separate social plus just the underlying. If it's historically right thing to do, then it shouldn't also be dependent on maybe the workforce and all. And again, that's all I was trying to say. I think it's
See, so to speak, it's just it's an added plus up if in fact it does that as well. So it does not preclude any historical thing. It doesn't require it at all. It's just a slight additional benefit, and it may, in some instances, Chairman Knight, it may allow certain things to be rehabilitated, blighted areas or blighted buildings, so to speak, that otherwise the investment may not be warranted.
And before you walked in the room, Chairman Blackman, Representative Buckner and I were having a conversation. She gave it a marvelous illustration of, was it Macon? What city? Of Macon, that they were able to aggregate a lot of dwellings and bring them up to code and really improve the neighborhood, but they didn't have to use, it wasn't tied back in the historic rehabilitation program, but it wasn't tied back to workforce housing. It wasn't part of.
They did get some money from a variety of pots and put it together, but they had, in a community like Macon, city planners, they had Historic Macon, which is famous because it's been
Right.
doing historic preservation. They put together all of these things. This just makes it easier for small Pulaski counties, Talbot counties, and
Rural
Harris
Georgia.
to be able to do it in rural Georgia and save some of those. You know, every little town has a huge something that's sitting there vacant, falling in, that could be multi-purposed and saved as a historic structure. And this would be a vehicle to do that.
I agree with you,
And
except
they
for
don't
the
have the
housing.
planners that Macon had.
So I'm philosophically good with everything, especially being able to aggregate. I like the idea of being able to aggregate the homes. One developer can come in and qualify. The only problem I have heartburn with, and I've got to vote no on it, is the workforce housing policy. It's when we're moving into housing policy. It's subsidized housing.
Chairman Houston.
Well, but don't you think that in some small towns, there are historical structures for homes that aren't antebellum homes? They're just small homes that we'd like to keep. I know down at and out from Perry, I can't even think of the name of the place that we used to go to for conventions. They had taken these old and well, they moved them, but on the same principle, some of those houses, shotgun houses. I've got some shotgun houses in my town that would be good housing for people, but nobody wants to put their money in it, and would like to save them.
I feel so passionate about this, I can't be quiet, but it's not a requirement the way I read it. It's just another feather in the, or another arrow in the quiver. It's just something else to help. Please change your mind and vote for this. It's really
Well,
good.
let's go on and let's go ahead and just continue through the bill.
Mr. Chairman, point of
Quickly,
clarification.
if you don't mind.
This only applies to commercial structures. It's not to historic homes. It's only to commercial structures. The workforce housing is in the commercial structure part of the code section.
That's my question. My question is, if they aggregate like 30 homes in a neighborhood, would that meet the definition of commercial?
I don't have the answer for you on that. I can tell you that if an individual owns a home and wants to restore a historic home, this is in the section that's about commercial projects, not about residential projects. So if somebody took an old funeral home and turned it into condominiums,
Right.
and then that could be a commercial structure.
But again, I'm just trying to get back to the definition of why I would assume that, because the intended effect, like Representative Buckner says, is to bring back neighborhoods. Why wouldn't you be able to aggregate a number of single family dwellings, duplexes or whatever, and it fall under that same?
I don't know that this legislation precludes that. It's not the intent of the legislation. It's more about commercial structures. The other thing I would point out is, I think one way to look at this is it's a bump from 25% tax credit to a 30% tax credit. As Chairman Blackman said, it's not dependent on that in any way. You don't have to check that box that you have low income housing unless you get that additional 5%.
All right, we're going to have to, we
Yes, sir.
obviously have some good discussion that's still to be had, I think, on the bill. I think we're going to have to adjourn for today. Rules is starting, and that's okay with the author. We're going to postpone any, we'll gather our reasoning together and then move forward and schedule another meeting to hear this to its conclusion, unless the author.
Mr. Chairman, before you adjourn, Chairman, Powell had a bill, as we get back to this one as the last word, he had a building in Pelham that he was very interested in that was a commercial building that may have been developed into workforce housing that this would fit perfectly for.
Thank you. With-
And I think he was most interested in what it could do for rural Georgia. And I think that's where my heart and mind is personally. And I think Representative Buckner and others in this room feel similarly. So thank you very much for entertaining that option.
Mr. Chairman, I don't want, I think I'm pretty much alone. If you want to call the question, I think the votes are here to move it on to full committee. I'm just trying to.
I think we're at a point at this time that we need to adjourn the meeting and move on to rules.
That was my idea too. We're going to adjourn the meeting. Thank you, guys.